This is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast. This is VP. We are a solutions-based podcast, diving into the world of contrarian investing and alternative finance. You can find us hosted on the No Nonsense Forex YouTube channel, NoNonsenseForex.com, and podcast players everywhere. Episode 208 is brought to us by Bybit. We have a huge promo going on for those of you, and there are a lot of you, surprising amount of you, who have signed up for Bybit but never deposited. There is a big promotion going on which says if you deposit and start trading now, Bybit will pay you for that. Bybit already pays active traders in many different ways. But on top of what they already do, I'm going to put the pay table and the promotion in the blog, which you can click and see down below, which you will have to go to if you want to click and get signed up with my affiliate link, which is what gives you all of these great benefits. So that is what you need to do. Go click on the blog down below in the show notes. Read what's going on with Bybit. Check out this new promo and get signed up because in so many ways, traders with Bybit membership has its rewards. It is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast, and on Thursday, I tweeted out, "May you live in interesting times, but may you also be protected from those interesting times." And as I often do, that tweet was a foreshadow for today's episode. And there is no doubt we live in interesting times. I predicted this at the very top of 2020, said, look out, contrarians. This decade is going to be an absolute monster. And I explained some reasons why. Now, if I'd have made that same prediction at the very beginning of 2010, and we would have gotten halfway through the decade, you would have looked back and said, what the hell is VP talking about? Like, really, not much has been going on. You know, my life is pretty much the same, if not a lot better than it was 5 years prior. And most people around the world seem to be getting along okay. You know, things are relatively safe and nice, and I can afford things and still have disposable income and invest and do all this. But not this decade. No, sir. What do we have? We have wars breaking out everywhere. We have domestic issues going on everywhere in Western countries. And we have a situation, too, where middle-class people, you know, whatever's left of them, can no longer afford anything. Last decade they could, but now they can't. You know, what has happened? Contrarians who listen to this financial podcast, you should know the answer to this. Let's take the biggest example of things people can no longer afford. Let's talk about homes. Home prices have gone up like absolute crazy. Why is this? Do homes do more things than they did before? Have they become more valuable as an actual asset as far as what they do and what they give you? No. Maybe they've gotten more scarce. Maybe there's just less of them, and that made price go up. No. Also incorrect. Homes are getting built all over the place, and we still have an excess from what we were building back in 2008. This is the United States, by the way. I do not know the housing situation in every country. But what happened? Why did the price of homes go up as much as they did? Why did the price of a Big Mac go up as much as it did? Are we experiencing a scarcity of beef and grains and lettuce? Of course not. None of these things are true. What has been the one common denominator in all of these things? Our money has gotten way, way worse. Technology continues to improve at an exponential rate, which you think would make things a lot cheaper over time. But the absolute opposite is happening because our money is getting worse at an even bigger rate. So what is that number? Well, what I did is, since I've been talking about finance for the better part of 7 years now, I just went back to 2018 when my channel started. Yeah, it started in early 2018. And I asked AI. I asked ChatGPT, Grok, and Gemini, all three. How much value has the United States dollar lost since 2018? And I got pretty consistent answers across the board. ChatGPT said 27.29%. Grok said the exact same thing. Gemini came in a bit lower at 24.33%. What this means is a best case scenario, and I'll talk about why this is the best case scenario in a moment. The value of the world's reserve currency has lost over a quarter of its value in just under 7.5 years. Now, there are some people on the other side of this argument. I heard, God, I wish I could remember who it was. I would actually do what I never do and call his ass out. But he's one of those people who thinks everything's fine, and because GDP is at record highs in the United States, that we're doing better than we've ever done. And I'm sure this person lives in a really great neighborhood where he's surrounded by beauty and safety and prosperity and doesn't have to worry about any of the things that your average person has to worry about. But he said, stop being so goddamn stupid about inflation. Yes, your dollar might be worth 25% less, but wages have also gone up in that same time. So it's not a big deal. Okay. Well, then how do you explain the change in the United States and Western countries all across the world in terms of what your average person could afford back then but cannot afford now? Why is this change even happening then? That's crazy, right? Well, for starters, he's talking out of his ass because have your wages gone up 25% in the last 7 years? Maybe if you're very young and you've gotten better jobs, but if you've been at the same job, has it gone up that much? Probably not. 2, and here's the kicker. Here's why I started the description of this podcast the way I did. Those stats I gave you when it came to how much value the dollar has lost over the past 7.5 years factored in CPI. Now, anybody who is a fan of this show is probably somebody who pays attention to finance and economics, and they know what a steaming load of horseshit those CPI numbers actually are. So as terrifying as those numbers were, what I just got done telling you was the fluffy cake and ice cream unicorn fart fantasy world stats, not the real ones. After Grok gave me the number it did, that 27.29%, I went back and asked it, okay, I saw you calculated CPI into your equation. Now what I want you to do is to do the same math, but don't use the CPI numbers our government gave us. Give us the CPI numbers Shadow Stats gave us. If you don't know, Shadow Stats is a website run by John Williams who attempts to find the actual stats compared to what is being reported. So Grok said, okay, redid the math, and you know what came out? You know what number came out, what percentage of value the United States dollar has lost since the beginning of 2018? Not 27.29%, which is already appalling and should make everybody on Earth take action immediately. No. The new number, when you factor in real, unmanipulated stats, is 63.65% in the last 7.5 years. Now things start to make a bit more sense, huh? I was just, for the last 2 months, more than that, I've been back in the U.S., and I was in a town, a really nice town that people retire to. It is a growing town. It is a prosperous town compared to a lot of places in the U.S. Most cities are completely dying. Now, this place is actually doing pretty well, and I have not been back here for about 2 years. But I noticed a very, very big change. You notice these things more when you're away, and then you come back. For the first time ever, there were homeless people, or at least enough to where you would see them every day. Every single place I went, except for the one really good grocery store chain, there's 3 or 4. But every grocery store, every fast food restaurant, every sit-down restaurant, every drugstore was horrendously understaffed. Some of these places had signs that said, "Pardon us, we're very understaffed right now," and other places just didn't even have a sign. They're like, "Yeah, you know what's going on. Everything kind of sucks now, so just, you're going to have to deal with it." Now, depending on where you are in the U.S. or in the world, your mileage may vary. Your experiences will certainly vary. I get that. But even your most patriotic Americans that 10 years ago would have just died on the hill that America is the greatest country in the world by far, even those people are like, yeah, shit kind of sucks now. I'm not going to lie. Still love my country, still think it's great, but, actually living here is just not what it was. Everybody is old enough to remember what it used to be and what life used to be like. And almost nobody out there is saying it got better. But we should be optimistic, VP. We've been through these things before, And, we always find a way, we seem to find a way to figure it out and to get back on track. We fix what was broken, new technologies come around, and life for your average person becomes even better eventually. Yeah, I wouldn't be too sure about that because, technology is awesome and it is getting better. But in terms of society and what that's going to mean for your average person, or even your above average person, and certainly your below average person in terms of the income spectrum, is this new generation of robotics and AI going to be a good thing or a bad thing? It's going to be a bad thing for a lot of people, just like outsourcing was, back in the early 2000s. Companies are going to have no choice but to use it because, as patriotic as they might be, they won't even have a business if they don't fully utilize this technology while their competition is. And we already know many, many people around the world are going to lose their jobs to it. Well, VP will also make things cheaper. Maybe. And if they do, great. They better become a hell of a lot cheaper. Because in the last 7.5 years, if we really have lost 63.65% of the value of our currency, then that's how much cheaper everything else is going to have to get in the future. Because, contrarians, I see no end in sight for the devaluation of fiat currency long term. Like, what's it going to be? How is it going to happen? The financial world is finally figuring out that the United States has a gigantic tax burden, and that bill is finally coming due. Now, even when I was young, I already knew spending was out of control and debt was out of control, at least in the United States. But it was one of those things to where, like, okay, we have like 30, 35 years for them to do something about it until the bill becomes due. So it's not really a problem. Well, it's officially 30, 35 years later. And the bill's not only due, the bill is so much bigger than it was back then, by magnitudes. And the interest alone has become insolvent. And if you're somebody, again, who thinks Trump is going to fix this, no, he is not. All right? I will give Trump credit. He has done some very common sense things that needed to be done, and we were all scratching our heads for 20 some odd years wondering why nobody bothered to fix these problems. They just remained problems that, to add insult to injury, the taxpayers would have to fund. Okay, that's good, but the underlying problem, the thing that's going to screw everybody, no matter who you are, is only going to get worse under President Trump, because President Trump, like every president before him in the last 30 years, loves to spend. We don't need to keep spending. We need to do something to make that chart turn towards the downside. Elon was exactly right. But that's not what's going on. Oh, and don't think voting for Harris would have made this any better. That would have been nothing more than an extension of the Biden administration, and the Biden administration spent a lot of money too. I know some people are going to want to turn it into that. It's irrelevant. My point is, Trump is not the savior at the end of the day a lot of people think he's going to be. So if the future didn't look scary enough, I would just say get used to the value of your fiat currency devaluing at this rate while we sit here and wait for robotics and AI to take away a bunch of people's jobs. I don't see much of an end in sight. Now, some of you who are fans of the show might be saying, well, VP, you always said, you need to stack cash. You do, for the very good possibility of a recession, so you can come in and swoop up and get assets, which we will talk about soon. But I personally just don't see a good end in sight. And if there is one, I would like to know how we get there. And you're talking to an optimist. You're talking to somebody who likes to make fun of doomers. And even I'm over here like, so I'm looking over the numbers and, we're kind of fucked. So the remaining half of this podcast, or longer than half, however long it takes, is going to be me outlining the 4 main aspects you better have way sooner than later if you're going to get through this. And if you are a man and you're the head of your household, you better listen doubly close, because there's going to be a lot of women out there who hitched their wagons to the wrong guy, who did not prepare correctly. Because at the end of the day, if you are the head of the household and you're the main breadwinner, this responsibility falls on you. Well, but what about women? They make just as much money. Women are wired differently. They don't pay attention to this shit like we do. And it is a double standard, but the burden falls more on us than it does them, and that's always going to be the case. So let's go ahead and get on to the solutions. The first one, as you know, is very obvious, and that is to have gold. The price of gold has more than doubled since I started talking about it back in 2018. And it has more than doubled against most other fiat currencies. I'm just talking about the dollar. So now you tell me, based on that alone, gold did not all of a sudden become more difficult to find in the ground. If anything, technology has made it easier. That being said, which stat from earlier would you like to believe? The 27.29% or the 63.65%? I rest my case. Now, as far as the future holds, contrarians, there's a reason why huge sovereign nations and even small sovereign nations bought a shit ton of gold. They know something. They have to protect themselves and their citizens. And, let's be honest, they got to protect their own ass more than their citizens. Because if they don't, then the citizens are going to come over that wall. But if you think you're smart and those countries are stupid, well, then don't buy gold. Don't worry about it. Just do whatever else you're going to do. But if you have common sense and you also want to be able to protect your money, which you would have done had you had bought gold back in 2018, you would not be experiencing a fraction of these problems most people are facing. Well, if I didn't already lay it out for you, the next 7 or so years is probably going to be worse for most people. Would you like to go down with the ship? Or would you like to start putting your money towards the ultimate defense? Now, some of you out there are saying, well, things like gold and Bitcoin are hitting all-time highs. I don't want to buy now. I'll buy on the dips. Okay, stop. First of all, no, you won't. You are like most people. You probably aren't completely like most people, but there is a small part of you that still has that broke person's scarcity mentality who only wants to buy when things are cheap. Now, I understand the logic of buying things when they are cheap, except for things like this. When it comes to things like gold and like Bitcoin, you just close your eyes and buy it at whatever price it is, and you sit back and hold. Because the consequences of not having these things is way too dire. There is no better strategy than this. Oh, but VP, I understand charts, and I can see when price is going to dip and come back up. Great. Price also might not dip. Now you're left with either buying gold at even higher prices or stuck with a bunch of fiat that's only going to go down further in value. Buy now. Allocate a portion of your paycheck towards gold, and then just keep doing it. Seriously, what other choice do you have here? Your only hope is that I'm completely wrong about all this. And on a large macro global scale, how often has that happened since you've known me? Do you really think 7.5 years from now, those who held gold instead of fiat cash are going to end up with egg on their face? I'll just leave it there. But since I just mentioned Bitcoin, let's go ahead and talk about Bitcoin as well. Now, everybody should also have Bitcoin. There is extra downside risk with Bitcoin compared to gold. Of course, it is more volatile. Quantum computing, yada, yada. Maybe those outliers are right. It is one big Ponzi scheme. Who knows? But the upside and the fact that there is only a finite amount of it, which I've done an entire episode on, more than justifies the extra downside risk you are going to get with Bitcoin compared to gold. Whatever portion of it you can manage to get your hands on, and having a portion of it is going to be big. There will come a time where the bigger portion you have of Bitcoin, the better off you're going to be. You probably need to get your hands on as much of it now as you possibly can. And again, if you're one of those people with a scarcity, broke person's mindset, and you're afraid the value is going to drop, look, if the value drops, great. Now you get to buy more at a discount. Now, I don't know what financial situation you are in, but gold, even though everybody needs it, is going to be more for wealth preservation, to where Bitcoin is going to be for people who need to make more money than they're making right now. Because Bitcoin in the future is probably going to be able to do that for you a lot more than gold will. So decide where you are on that spectrum and allocate your position accordingly. But it is my strong advice that you will need both. Moving on. What is something else that rich people have that poor people generally don't, and even the middle class generally don't? That's going to be assets. Assets you actually own. And we just talked about homes earlier in the show. I don't mean a home. I don't think anybody right now at these prices needs to go take out a loan and become debt slave for the next 20, 30 years. I mean, once you get past the propaganda and look at the absurdity of that, then a home for most people is probably not the answer. I got talked into it back in 2007. Like, well, I can keep renting, or I can actually have something I have some real equity into. And so I went ahead and bought my condo at the top of the bubble. And when I finally got rid of it, you know how much equity I had in that home? Dick. Nothing. I was pretty much renting my own home to myself and had the exact same amount of debt that I would have to find some magical way to pay for. Now, luckily, that magic existed in the form of short selling. But man, if it didn't, it's brutal. So brutal. But at the end of the day, rich people stay rich because when fiat currencies crash, they have assets, and while everybody else just sits there in cash. And the key here is to buy when things are cheap, because all of these assets go in cycles. You know, it finally looks like we're coming down on tech. Finally looks like we're coming down on homes. So where is the value? Well, if you didn't already know, this podcast mainly focuses on that one thing. When it comes to offense, you know, we play offense and defense equally here. Now, you could talk about energy and materials. Those are things we are always going to need, and there's going to come a time where we need more than we have. We know that. But in the meantime, things there are going to be very cyclical too, and it really comes down to being able to read a chart and or buying things when it's pretty clear that we're at the dead bottom, or at least really close to it. Like we've done here with uranium, like we've done here with natural gas, even though we lost our ass on it twice before we got it right. That is how you gain assets there. And because of the cyclicality of it, that's probably not something you're just going to be able to sit on and hold and say, hey, look, I got assets. You have to buy things when they're cheap and unloved and everybody's talking shit about them, which now, due to social media, everybody's going to see, and then absolutely nobody's going to want to buy it. This is exactly when you do buy. There's a particular asset class out there right now that I'm looking at very heavily. And no, I will not be talking about that asset class right now. And yes, I will be talking about it next week in episode 209, provided that nothing too crazy happens in between now and then. And we all know that that possibility is quite real. But I'll try to not keep you hanging for too long on that. And then finally, there are 4 things you are going to need to survive the next 7.5 years. We just mentioned 3: gold, Bitcoin, and assets. What is the 4th? Hint, we talk about it all the time on this show, more now than we ever have in the past. That 4th thing is options. If you're somebody who lives in the collapsing West, for example, and you want to stay there, you have my permission to do so. There are a lot of reasons why you may want to stay there. I get it. But at the very least, give yourself the option to go somewhere else. You don't have to go full ham and get a second passport. You can do something as simple as get a residency permit. I currently have 3, and in none of those places am I obligated to live there for any real amount of time. Mexico, which is the cheapest one and in a great country, you can get, and then once you have your permanent residency, you never have to go back to Mexico ever again. But you could, if you needed to, along with all the benefits, especially as an American. Having a second residency permit grants you, especially in the banking world. Most offshore banks, which you will also need, and we'll be talking about more, some of the advantages you're going to get with that, which simply just aren't available to most of your countrymen. You're going to need a residency permit for that. They don't want to fuck with Americans. Most banks still don't want to fuck with Americans for good reason. Our compliance is ridiculous. And, they saw what we just did to Russia. And they want zero chance of something like that ever happening to them. But your options go up a lot once you have that second residency card in your hand. Now, with this one, people are especially stupid because they come up with all these excuses without doing any research, not realizing that their excuses are probably completely wrong. They just want to justify their own fear and laziness. That's all they're doing. Don't think I don't see through you. First, they think they have to live there. I've already told you you don't. Second, they worry if they're going to qualify or not. Well, right now, it keeps going up, but you probably do meet the financial requirements for Mexican residency, for example, and that's just one residency. But Mexico also, you can have a criminal record, and they don't care. If you got the money, they figure, you're probably fine regardless of what you did in the past. This is not going to be the case with Panama or Paraguay, but it is Mexico. To where the flip side of that is Paraguay doesn't give a shit what you make. They just want to make sure you weren't a criminal in a past life. So there is an option out there for you to where you will not have to be stuck in one place. As bad as things are getting, I hear a lot of places out there, a lot of people talking on some of these podcasts saying, hey, get to know your neighbor, stock up on bullets, all this stuff. Okay, that's not a terrible idea, but it's a pretty miserable idea overall. Like, are you just going to sit there and live or die where you are, come what may? Or are you at least, at the very least, going to give yourself the option of exiting the battlefield should that time come? Now, you might be saying, well, VP, I don't have to have a residency card just to go up and go to another country if I want to. In normal cases, yes. But we saw already, back in 2020, 2021, when shit goes sideways, and shit would have to go really sideways for this scenario where you're really going to have to worry about stocking up on ammunition and getting to know your neighbor and all this kind of stuff. We're talking about a real economic collapse here where things are just bad for everybody, and as a result, crime's going to go way up. We know in those over-the-top situations, you can't just go anywhere. And even if you could, you probably want to be nowhere near the battlefield to begin with. How many commercial flights are leaving out of Israel and Iran right now? Probably not enough to satisfy demand, I'll tell you that. If they're even flying out at all, I haven't looked. In Ukraine, as soon as the war happened, they said, okay, all fighting age males, you're not allowed to leave. You have to stay and fight, whether this is the war you wanted or this is not the war you wanted. Sorry, womp womp. While the door is still open to get these things cheaply and easily, you need to act as soon as possible. Because as we've seen, they only get more expensive and more difficult to obtain. They already have. Now, I will say if Latin America is not your thing and you have some weird aversion to it, Armenia has become a really interesting choice and an affordable choice. It may have, for all I know, it may have always been there. I just wasn't aware of it. But it's there, and it's something you can look into. I do have an Armenian bank. It's very good. And so you would have access to that ecosystem yourself. While we're talking about it, I wanted to throw that option out there. For those of you who might be in Europe or Western Asia and you kind of want to stay over there, or at least in that time zone, and you want to be closer to people you care about, I get it. But there is an option there for you as well. And if I knew more about it, I would talk more about it, but I just don't. Now, the final piece I wanted to mention here goes into that options category. But if it wasn't already obvious, you are going to have to become good at more money-making things than you are right now. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here because the majority of you have either already learned how to trade or are in the process of doing so, and that is fantastic. But you will need to pick up other skills apart from what you already have. You will need to have multiple income streams. If you think 3 is going to get you there, get 5, because you might lose 2 on the way. And if you're somebody who's sitting there saying, well, I just don't know what I would do, go find out. It's so easy to do nowadays. Ask AI. They don't even have to be things that you're interested in or really excited about. Maybe if you're starting a business, it needs to be, but if you're just trying to pick up a second job or an online job, shit, man, do anything. But you need to have those options in your back pocket. Like truckers right now are completely screwed, and they know that. We see self-driving vehicles. We see self-driving trucks now, and it really sucks for these guys. But you know as well as I do, the majority of them are going to sit there and not do a goddamn thing about it. All whilst the money they do have is losing its value at record levels. Like, what are we doing here, guys? Do not end up like that. The worst thing possible, and I've said this before too, is to be somebody who listens to a podcast like this and other podcasts like it, and you knew what to do the whole time. You just didn't, because you're afraid like all your money would go away. God forbid you made an investment or two, and would never come back for some weird reason. Garbage, stupid, ridiculous scarcity mindset that nobody in the Western world should have. Even if you're not in the Western world, I don't think you can afford to have this going forward. Find a way. Those ways are out there. The information we have available to us is better now than it's ever been. Not everything sucks. But you better become very rich in the 4 things I just described in this podcast episode if you're going to make it. And I will make damn sure I drill deeper into all 4 of those things as we move forward. Because I said this a few episodes too. I am not considered a rich man, at least not in my country. I am in the countries I live in, which is extremely important when it comes to having options, believe you me. But back in 2018 and extending into 2020, when I picked up my first investment into Bitcoin, I was not afraid to be crazy because I ended up being early. Now, as a result of this, I am strong in all 4 of the categories I just got done talking about. So going forward into this next 7.5 years, you also need to be perceived as a little bit crazy. Because just like me, when that time's up, you won't be crazy. You will just be considered early.